Welcome, viewers. Thanks for tuning in. We've got Andres Gomez Emilsson, who was born in Mexico City in 1990, and from an early age he developed an interest in philosophy, mathematics, and science, leading him to complete nationally and internationally in math and science Olympiads. At 16, his main interest was mathematics, but a so-called mystical experience made him turn his attention to consciousness and philosophical problems that it poses. He studied symbolic systems with an artificial intelligence concentration at Stanford and later finished a master's in computational psychology at the same university. During his time at Stanford, he co-founded the Stanford Transhumanist Association and became good friends with David Pearce, whom I've interviewed quite a lot on this channel, taking on the flag of the hedonistic imperative. Thus, his ongoing interest is the functional, biochemical, and quantum substrates of pure bliss. Sounds good to me. And he's currently working at a natural language processing startup in San Francisco. And in his free time, he develops psychophysical tools to study and the computational properties of consciousness. See more at his blog, Qualia Computing, to which I shall link below. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah.
Yes, it's going great. Even better now that you're here. So yeah. Well, I've been like we've had a discussion, a number of talks privately before, but we also interacted via a panel online about a year ago or a year and a half ago or something like that. With David Pearce, Mike Johnson, and Brian Thomasick. And that was fun. So
Yes.
that was about reducing suffering. And a lot of your studies revolve around understanding what is the mind, what is consciousness, and what is really experience. So, in general, do you want to give us a background as to what inspired you to get involved in this sort of this area of inquiry?
Yes. So I guess first of all, my sort of like broadest interest has always been figuring out why there's something rather than nothing. Basically, like the biggest question possible. And I was obsessed with this question from an early age, and I sort of like assumed that actually mathematics, or more precisely physics at least, would be the way to go in figuring out like actually what underlies the nature of reality, why we are here, and why the laws of physics are the way they are. Um, and so I sort of like dedicated a lot of time and effort into sort of like studying mathematics and getting sort of like a good intuition of like what actually you can do with it. And um, I think I got some ideas, but it sort of like never was actually like satisfying in terms of like addressing the big questions. And somewhere along the lines, I started to also figure out that hey, our sort of like current understanding of how consciousness works and even why consciousness exists is not really at the level where we can actually say something meaningful about it. As you mentioned, when I was 16 and started exploring other states of consciousness, I really had an epiphany that actually the most important sort of like area of study from both a scientific and even an ethical point of view was consciousness, and that we really should actually study it in a very rational and systematic way. So since then, I've focused a lot of my attention and energy into actually how trying to make some progress in this question. And At least currently, and we can talk more about it later, I actually think that the question of why is there something rather than nothing will actually ultimately be connected both with physics but also with consciousness. And a full explanation will require to actually incorporate both of them at the same time.
Right. Okay. Well, that's quite interesting. I mean, you probably have an interesting debate with Lawrence Krauss about the issue of consciousness, and given the subject of one of his more recent books, "Why Is There Something Rather Than Nothing?" Yes, for sure. Now, just out of interest, would you consider yourself a deist? Do you think that there was some intelligence there which created, or self-created consciousness?
I'm agnostic. I find it very unlikely. So there's basically, I mean, there's like a almost like a moral argument for why that at least hopefully is not the case, which is that hey, like actually the reality that we live in contains so much suffering that it would be very hard to actually justify making it from scratch without some like very serious reason behind it. I actually remember yeah, David Pierce mentioning something like that the only way in which a benevolent God makes sense creating this reality is if the purpose for creating this reality is to prevent an even bigger evil of some sort. As if we were some kind of experiment that has like some higher purpose to prevent like something even like more awful from happening. Not to say that there aren't great things and very worthwhile things in these realities, just that yeah, God would have to be held accountable for Auschwitz and many other things that happened.
Yeah. So we're on the unfortunate track of a really large trolley experiment.
Right. It could be opposing the cosmic evil forces that have no beginning and no end, but you might be able to dilute them. I don't know. But yeah, I assign a fairly low probability that actually there's like some guiding intelligence behind it. But I have an open mind. Yeah.
Mm. Well, this brings into question, like, if across the simulation argument, this has been quite prominent recently, and I guess you'd say, based on your logic, that we're not in a simulation, likely, right?
Yeah, I really don't see. Well, yeah, there's like various elements there, but like on the one hand, like a lot of people think of sort of like ancestrous simulations where the purpose would be to sort of like figure out what like how history happened, like maybe get a glimpse of like one possible pathway. Say like so far in the future that superintelligence has forgotten about its own origin and it sort of like wants to know what happened.
Hmm.
I find all of that like a very unlikely kind of cause. Basically, the kind of knowledge that you would want as a superintelligence would not really benefit all that much from like just taking one particular possible path and simulating it all the way through. You would just like actually get rid of the bulk of it because it's like fairly uninteresting and the most of it that you have like actually like you can grasp already and you would focus on the interesting parts. So basically we would actually probably experience like some events in history of some extremely small say like moments of big realization or whatnot being simulated like trillions of times and the vast majority of other moments just being completely forgotten and like not actually studied. So just like it sounds very unlikely that you would just see something as natural and most of all sparse as the reality in which we live. There might be other purposes or objectives. I mean, some people even have this weird idea that sort of like super intelligences might create simulations just for fun or something like that, which to me sounds like extremely strange because it sounds like an extraordinarily inefficient way of actually getting fun. Like if you're a super intelligence, you would get at the fountain of fun itself. You would not just like go through like a low value form of entertainment that takes a long time and like you can't really relate to it. It's yeah, I find it a very alien explanation. So yes, unless I guess it was for the purpose of like preventing even higher amounts of suffering, I find it very unlikely that it will give us simulation.
Hmm. Right. I mean, like that's cool. And I kind of like sway towards your line of argument there. I'm not a big proponent. I agree that there is a philosophical reason why someone should take the idea seriously because you have to assign some probability weight to it. But based on what I see, it doesn't look like it's real. Now, if we were to, for instance, do a reverse test on this simulation hypothesis, imagine like we were video game characters, we didn't know it, and we had empirical tests within the video game environment that showed us that the world in which we lived was actually a simulation. Say
Yes.
something happened and we managed to get out of the simulation, and the world around us was devastated through some like sort of a war or something, and there were no humans left to really explain what went wrong. We just saw evidence that there was. But once we got out and we managed to harvest molecules and give ourselves corporeal bodies, and then we started probing the real universe, and every experiment that we got showed us that, well, gave us feedback that indicated that we were living in a reality that didn't seem to have any sort of programming or simulating nature to it. Would we still consider the likelihood of the being in the simulation the same as when we were in a real simulation in a video game environment once we'd escaped? I mean, it seems
I,
like the more and more experiments we would do, the
yeah.
more we'd assume that we're actually in a basement reality. Whereas people today are saying, well, the more simulations that are created, the more and more likely we're in a simulation. So the intuition seems to be sort of guided by the origin of the starting point from which we began reasoning about this sort of thing.
I see.
Mm.
Yes, I don't know. I happen to think in the scenario you provide that if we got out of a simulation and we saw a world that seemed even more real, like in that scenario, I would actually say that it's even more like it's very likely that you're still in a simulation. It obviously depends on the tests and like hey, like there actually might be like a fundamental argument for why you are in, as you call it, basement reality. But yeah, I don't think we have like a definite proof either way currently.
No, certainly not. But we're talking about real fundamentals here, going back to the cause of things, friend. Like you started talking about why there's something rather than nothing, how it's tied up with qualia consciousness. And I'm just wondering, like, well, what role did consciousness, suffering and pleasure, and hedonic tone play in our ancestral environment, in the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness?
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is you could roughly connect this question with epiphenomenalism, and I guess I'll just like briefly explain epiphenomenalism for those who haven't heard it. So basically, this is the notion that brain states actually do happen to be associated with conscious states. However, the conscious states are not actually doing any work. All that you need to know in order to know the like following state of a particular brain state is really just the brain state itself and maybe its environment, depending on how comprehensive you want to be. But let's say even if you're in a sensory deprivation tank or some like a unenriched environment, you really just need like the body and the brain. And in that sense, you don't actually have to take into account any like actual features of consciousness as such in order to be able to understand what's going to happen next. And in that view, which implicitly a lot of people actually seem to have, you do have the question of like, hey, like then how do we actually like know that there is a consciousness to begin with if all of the reference that actually exists that could influence the world ultimately refer back to something physical that is non-conscious? Yeah, it's actually somewhat tricky to explain why epiphenomenalism is not the case, but I can do my best. Basically, evolution must have had some way of recruiting consciousness so that it could actually select it so that animals actually instantiated. If there wasn't anything that consciousness as consciousness could do for an organism to spread its wider, to increase its inclusive fitness, there will be no lever for evolution to actually be able to grasp it, to do something with it. The big question is actually what aspect or what component of consciousness is interesting and useful for an for an organism. And here there's like various hypotheses, but two main points that I would actually highlight. On the one hand, you have valence, which is basically how good an experience feels, like whether blissful, calming, nice or unpleasant, depressing, and so on. The valence axis, also called the pleasure pain axis. It's extraordinarily relevant in consciousness, and I think it's a very unique feature of consciousness. And the second thing is that basically a conscious experience simultaneously puts together multiple pieces of information, and that it's somehow by these actually simultaneous coexistence of all of these pieces of information, some information processing can be accomplished. That would be extremely hard without it. That in this sense, actually, whenever there's an instance of a conscious experience in an animal, there is some non-trivial computation that is going on as a consequence. And I must highlight here that hey, well, but couldn't you just say that consciousness is just computation? Then really you're saying if there is this kind of computation and the computation is beneficial, that kind of computation will thrive and be replicated. But then again, we are back at epiphenomenalism, where you say, hey, I can describe computation just in terms of forms and functions, without any reference to any substrate. And if you do that, yes, you have again forgotten about explaining consciousness and why it was selected. So the claim here is that actually states of consciousness are accessing a very particular quality of the physical world, a particular state where a lot of pieces of information can be put together at once. And yes, together with David Pierce, the sort of like leading hypothesis of what's actually making these binding operations, this putting together of the various pieces of information is ultimately quantum coherence. Basically something that actually does attach to the intrinsic nature of the physical in a non-trivial way. But yeah, that's going very advanced into the topic. But yes, basically the claim here is we are conscious because consciousness is actually useful and provides a comparative advantage over non-conscious animals. At least all else being equal in terms of resources and time complexity of the algorithms we solve and so on. Supervise like that unity that enables information processing in a more efficient way.
Right. So that's what makes consciousness special. The unity, this unity that makes processing of information a lot more efficient and a lot more, I guess, relevant to the organism. Yeah. So, I mean, well, George, can you like solidify how this relates to the purpose that you have in reducing suffering? So, we've spoken about this before in a panel, but I'd just like you to bring this up during this podcast for the benefit of people just listening today.
Yes. The main connection between sort of like consciousness research, figuring out what's relevant about consciousness that makes evolution selected, and ethics, basically like reducing suffering, is that you actually need to figure out what is the relevant subsystem in the brain that actually interfaces with what matters in consciousness. And you can't really do that without actually having an account of what consciousness is and how it basically is instantiated in the physical world. If you have a very fuzzy understanding, then you might be able to get like some approximations, be able to change the brain in some ways that prevent the worst kinds of suffering. But you won't be able to actually fine-tune it in a way that is actually enabling us to grow in a much more fantastic way. And yes, like ideally as well, there's like whole an entire solution or spaces of solutions or like ways in which we could change our consciousness that would be very useful. That if we don't have a good understanding of consciousness, we will just be completely blind to. So that is the motivation. I really think like that foundational research in this area is actually um, has profound implications in terms of ethics and the best pathway to eliminate as much suffering as possible.
Right, and this is something really worth discussing, I think. Now, if it turns out that you're wrong and David Pearce is wrong, and I have intuitions in the same direction, that look, there's no such thing as consciousness, and we're just barking up the wrong tree. It's all a big sort of illusion. It's what some sort of Cartesian theatre or Daniel Dennett style trickery.
Yeah.
Then we're all just wasting our time, but we don't know. You see, one of the things I've been thinking about, you've obviously you know of Mary's room, where you have a lady who's stuck in a room for all her life, and she can only ever experience the raw experience of black and white and shades of grey, a sort of a grayscale perception of the environment. But she's a neuroscience expert that can actually model and understand what color is. So she knows all about visual experience. She knows technically what color is, but she never actually experiences it in a sort of in a bound way. Would she learn anything more if she exited the room? So first of all, let's start with that thought experiment. I want to hear your answer, and I'm sure you know the thought experiment.
Yeah, yeah. Mary's room, and I guess just in that vein, there's
The
these.
knowledge argument, yes.
Yes, the knowledge argument. There's this recommendation I would make, which is to watch Dorian Electra video on Mary's room. I think it's called "What Mary Didn't Know." It's a pop song about this philosophical thought experiment, and just makes me really happy that. Oh no, it's actually yeah, it's kind of like a punk pop, and it's I don't know. I like that popular culture. It's getting into some philosophical ideas and exploring them. But yes, so Mary goes out of the room and sees a flower and experiences the qualia of red for the first time. And she learns something of value. And I would say, yes, actually, she's just like identified a particular qualia value of the qualia variety that is a phenomenal color. And there's like some aspects of that first-hand experience that actually provide her with the ability to process some information that she wouldn't be able to without actually having that experience. So at least at that level, it's undeniable that she has learned something. I do find it fascinating that yes, some people would claim that she hasn't learned anything, but yes. To begin with, she can basically now do something which is basically starting to solve a phenomenal puzzle. In other words, there is like this one task that Mary wouldn't be able to do if she's in the room without ever knowing like actually what colors feel like, which is to actually create the map or the state space of possible values for phenomenal color. Um, if you have like quite a few samples of qualia, colored qualia, then you can actually start to reconstruct that space and get some sense of what the shape of it is. But only knowing actually about neuroscience and our ability to basically yes, our ability to discriminate colors without knowing the phenomenology doesn't actually tell you what the structure of the state space is. But yes, I'm wondering like if you want to know more, there's like one article I wrote about this called phenomenal puzzles, or I think it's called a workable solution to the problem of other minds.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, I'll definitely put that link in the video description. So now an extension to this thought experiment that I blogged about a while ago was, well, what if it wasn't Mary? It was actually an AI in a box, basically bound by the fact that it couldn't experience raw feels. So it couldn't suffer, it couldn't have pleasure, and it couldn't feel anything. It had no experience of what it's like to like see the color red or whatnot. All it was data processing. Now, would that kind of AI, for instance, act differently than one that did have phenomenal experience, did have a form of qualia? And this relates to the control problem or AI friendliness in general, even such that would an AI act differently or strategize differently in how it managed human well-being if it were to try and program the AI to be as friendly as possible to us? Would giving it phenomenal consciousness a good thing?
Yeah,
Possibly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Sure. That's a good question. And so I think Brian Tomasic was raising these sort of very similar question. But Brian Tomasic,
Oh, Brian Tomasic. Okay. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I guess I will start. I will start by saying that basically I think you can have a super intelligent non-sentient intelligence. So basically an AI that actually doesn't have any consciousness, but it's still extremely powerful. I think things like that definitely exist. I could imagine actually some kind of like a system that basically designs with an evolutionary algorithm a wide variety of nanotechnology. And as soon as it can, it just creates a great goo. I mean, basically self-replicating nanomachines that transform all available matter and energy into just replicas of themselves. You might not actually need to understand consciousness to be able to build something like that. So in terms of just like raw power and danger to civilization, you can definitely have to worry about AIs even if they're not conscious. And yes, actually, there is, however, some sort of like range of behaviors and especially some range of utilities, the ways in which the AIs can be useful for us that are only accessible to actually sentient and conscious AIs. But this actually will require us to basically expand a little bit our definition of what intelligence is. So if your conception of intelligence is just to be able to adapt and dominate environments, to be able to say like, hey, like I want this to happen and this will happen, then actually you might be able to go very far without any consciousness, just like programming the laws of physics and making good simulations and learning from similar experiences and so on, or similar data points and so on. And that's all fine and good. However, there's like other senses of intelligence, other definitions, or at least possible meanings that basically enrich this conception, such as to be able to understand the motivations of others, and to actually do a good job at it. There's quite a bit of sort of like empathy that is required to actually empathy, not in a sort of like very science sense, but really in the sense of, hey, you actually need to simulate what it is like to be another person in order to be able to connect how the various values and goals and attitudes come together to get a behavior or to get a particular hedonic experience. In the future, actually, I think economics will largely be based towards trading information about consciousness. So researchers who like know how to instantiate like particular states of consciousness that are very valuable, sort of like designer synesthesia states or like blissful states and so on. Basically, we'll have a lot of economic power because a lot of people will be interested in how to get to those useful or fantastic states of consciousness. And an AI, in order to actually get powerful in that economy, would have to do a good job at that. In other words, it would have to be able to itself explore the state space of consciousness and find what's valuable in that state space. Some judgment that itself, I think you actually require to be conscious at the time to be able to make. So in that sense, the first super intelligence that doesn't have consciousness would be poor in that economy, as opposed to the enriched, empathetic, highly sentient super intelligence.
Right. So in a sense, like the AI without a rich sort of swag of experiences wouldn't have much to offer. But one that
Yes.
could,
Yes.
or just doesn't have anything, wouldn't have much to offer in this economy of experiences, tradable experiences. So that's interesting. And in a sense, if it could explore state spaces of experience, then it would be able to trade and offer something to us. We'd buy something, but what would we be trading it? Human safe spaces of experience? What you know, given that we're prone to suffering and non-optimal states of consciousness, what would we, as non-optimal experience machines, have to offer it?
Indeed. I mean, it
Indeed.
depends
I
on
mean, it
whether we have
depends
a
on whether
common
we have a
goal
common goal
and so on.
and so on.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, there is the
there is
optimism,
the
and to some
optimism, and to
extent,
some
there's like
extent,
some
there's like some
justification in it, which is
justification in
that
it,
if you
which is
actually
that
do
if you
have a
actually
super
do have a
intelligence
super intelligence that is
capable of empathetic understanding,
understanding,
it would
it would
also
also
presumably
presumably
have some
have some
what you might call,
what you
yes,
might call,
basically
yes, basically
decent ethics.
decent ethics.
This is something
This is
we
something
can't
we can't
count on,
count
but
on,
there's like
but there's like
some reasons to think
some
that it's
reasons to think that
possible
it's
to at
possible
least
to at
build
least build
something that is like
something
that.
that is like that.
But yes,
But yes,
if it is
if it is
benevolent,
benevolent,
then basically
then
it
basically
should
it
actually be
should
taking
actually be
care of
taking care
trying to reduce
of trying to
suffering as
reduce
much as
suffering as
possible.
much as possible.
But
But
otherwise, yes, I mean,
otherwise, yes,
I've
I mean,
thought of
I've thought of
if a group of
if a
people,
group of
for
people,
example,
for example,
become the
become
sort of
the
like
sort of like
richest persons
richest
in this
persons in
economy,
this economy,
what they can
what
basically
they
be
can
trading
basically be
for
trading for
is social
is
power
social power
and resources
and
to be
resources
able
to
to,
be able to,
on the one hand,
on the one
create
hand,
super
create
happiness
super happiness
um,
um,
and get
and get
resources by
resources
creating super
by creating
happiness
super
for the
happiness
rich
for the
so that
rich,
they can use
so that
those
they can use
resources to
those
prevent the
resources to prevent
suffering
the
in all of
suffering
the
in
other
all of the other
animals,
animals,
basically.
basically.
Um,
Um,
but yeah, I
but
mean,
yeah, I mean,
if you have like
if you have like
a huge
a
disparity, I
huge
mean, it's sort of
disparity, I
like
mean, it's sort
asking
of like
what
asking
does a
what does a
random person
random
have to
person have
offer
to offer
in terms of
in terms of
computing
computing
to like
to like
Microsoft
Microsoft
or Google.
or Google.
It's
It's
like if you do
like
by
if you do by
hand,
hand, sort of like
adding numbers,
adding
that's
numbers, that's
not fast
not
enough to
fast
be
enough
worth
to be
like a
worth
single
like a
cent
single cent
for Google.
for Google.
Likewise, as a
Likewise,
human,
as a
if you're
human, if
exploring
you're
the state
exploring
space
the
of
state space of
consciousness and you're
consciousness
doing
and you're
it
doing it
privately or maybe in
privately
a
or
little
maybe in a
group,
little group,
that's not
not
comparable to what a
comparable to
super
what a super
intelligence
intelligence
that
that
dedicates like
dedicates like
millions
millions
of
of
brains to the
brains to the
task would
task
be able to
would be able to
accomplish.
accomplish. So in a sense, like we may be entering a scenario where if we're trading experiences, really the economy, you see, the economy as we understand it today is really based around similar agents with reasonably similar sort of abilities in a sense that there's a reason why we trade with other people is their ability isn't far beyond ours and they need us and we need them. In a sense, the AI would only trade with us voluntarily unless it was programmed to be ethical, or on the other hand, it needed us. It
Right.
needed our experience, or on balance, all things being equal, it would find value in our experiences that it wouldn't be able to find in simulating its own experience. Like it running a billion, a squillion, a Google trillion, like a experience machines with consciousness, with real qualia, in like in a big simulated environment that was like extra special and even better than like ours, our little experience machines. So yeah, I mean like it still comes back to the problem of ethics, whether the AI considers us useful or whether it deems it ethical that all experiences should have, by nature of being there, or experience machines like ours, by nature of being there, should have a right to, to progress and to exist and to flourish.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
It's very tricky.
It's very tricky.
Yeah. I mean, that's a possible outcome if we manage this correctly. For example, if we basically focus on eliminating suffering, but we don't say, hey, let's also just maximize well-being as much as possible, independent of who has it. Because in that case, a very rational thing that super intelligence could do would basically just eliminate all life except itself.
Yeah, it could be a huge utility monster, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that can happen. It depends. Of course, like on this. It's sort of like touching on slightly different topic, but it's what probably one of the biggest differences in background assumptions when it comes to what motivates people, which is beliefs about personal identity. So you have basically three very sort of like broad views on personal identity. You have what's called closed individualism, which is the common sense view. This is I start existing when I'm born, I stop existing when I die, and there's like nothing else besides that. And most people are like explicitly closed individualists. And there's like some addendums you can add to it, such as like Christianity or Hinduism, where some branches of Hinduism where you might say, hey, like I existed before I was born, and I will exist after I die, but I will still be just one entity, just like one segment or one line in space-time. And I never exist more than one on any given point in time. Then you have another view called empty individualism, and many physicists tend to have this view. That is the view that you only exist in this one time slice. That basically from moment to moment, you're sort of like your brain is creating a new entity every time, and destroying it, and then creating a new one, destroying it, and the time actually doesn't pass. It's just sort of like an elaborate illusion of the structure of the present moment. But there's no actual passage of time. You just exist as this here and now. And finally, you have the third view, which is open individualism. This is the idea that in some sense we are all the same sort of like universal identity. You could imagine sort of like a universe with many eyes, like where each eye is a different entity, but it's still the same like big eye in the end. Depending on actually where your intuitions are in this question, you will have very different ideas about what is the future. I've actually asked around in the transhumanist community. I did at Stanford and at several conferences. I've asked people to sort of like raise their hands for which of these three views they identify with, and I've usually gotten a very equal split of the three. Who are like more or less 30%, like each of them. Which is really interesting. I mean, a general pattern is that people who are very close individuals who really say like, hey, no. Like, there's this one time you get to leave. You are like Andres Emilsson. There's no other entity like you in the multiverse, and this is your one chance. People who think that way, their priority life expectancy. It tends to be the most important thing is that we manage to actually preserve the entities that are alive. Because otherwise is basically forgetting them for eternity. I mean, it's really like extremely tragic if you're close individualist. Whereas open individualists and empty individualists may be more actually concerned about super intelligence and super happiness. With empty individualists perhaps having even more interest towards preventing suffering because they think, hey, like if I only exist in one time slice, it better not be a bad time slice. So let's try to prevent entities from just being in a bad time slice. So yeah, I think this is a profound background assumption, and when you think of what the super intelligence should do, depending on these background assumptions, you may think very different. If you're a close individualist, you will want to make sure that different entities, all of the entities that are alive, at least continue to be alive, they can flourish as individuals. maybe with a benevolent super AI as a dictator. But then an open individualist may say like, hey, actually, it's even better if just the AI swallow, or like, yeah, the super sentient benevolent intelligence just swallows the entire universe, because then it's just the most optimal way of producing wisdom and beliefs and well-being. And there's like, yeah, many scenarios in between. I particularly like about the idea of basically uh, merging between the superintelligence, but also maintaining your individuality as a history. So basically, you would be part of a unified organism, but you would still be an individual in the same sense that you can dream. Like if you go to bed and you have a dream and you dream that you're a dinosaur, the dinosaur may never have like really existed as a separate entity. It was just a hallucination, but the dream was very informative, and it was interesting to believe to be that. Likewise, I think, yes, preserving at least the impression that we are separate entities may have a lot of value.
Okay, so maintaining a history of self as an individual, but what about, I mean, like the experience of individual self? Would that be something you'd like to hang on to as well as be part of the big superintelligence?
I would prefer basically to have all the options. I mean, you would just like go and merge with the intelligence for a while, and then you would go and retire as an individual for a little bit, and then explore consciousness in other ways, participate in the economy of trading information about the state space of consciousness, and so on. Yeah. That said, there's always going to be like the temptation. Hey, like once you're actually merging, like why don't you get rid of the atoms that implement your body, just so that you actually create more beliefs, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Okay, so there might be some suboptimal experience that an individual has. But yeah, there's probably many sort of shades in between. Like I've spoken to James Hughes about this, and he feels the same way. Like to merge with a larger cluster of superintelligence, and while being connected to the big organism in a positive sense, also maintain this sort of sense of individuality, this sort of duality of individuality and collectiveness, which it seems really intuitively difficult to sort of grasp.
Right.
It's definitely worth trying. Yeah, I don't know if it's one of those things that you could, like, once you've done, you could necessarily um, find the motivation to go back to individualism. But then again, how would you weigh the benefits if you didn't experience both? It's a very difficult question.
Yes. I mean, it kind of like ties back with deism, because I mean, you did have some like spiritual doctrines, especially more like New Age ones, where basically the reason why like we would be separate from God, or like a super entity, is so that we can make mistakes, and actually in that way acquire wisdom. Because like if you actually know everything, you can't make mistakes. But yeah, it was kind of like an illusion where you're temporarily separated from who you truly are.
Sort of a veil of Maya, yes, sort of
Yeah, a
separated.
veil of Maya, so that you can yes, so that you can actually know yourself. I mean, very poetically, it's sort of like, hey, like only if you really believe there's something at stake, you will actually see how you act. But yes, I doubt actually an explanation like that would map into a super intelligence that would create.
Right, yeah. So this is interesting. Now you had a sort of short debate with Randall Kuhne, who's quite interested in mind uploading and digital putting minds in different substrate independent minds about qualia and experience. Now, yes, he seems to believe quite differently to you as to what accounts for qualia, if he actually believes in qualia. I'm not sure that he really thinks that there is. But can you explain the difference, why you believe that there's why quantum states are involved in phenomenal binding, and why he doesn't believe that that's the case. Like, for instance, he believes that there's like an intermittent, there's a series of experience that we have, and then later report and feel like they're a bound set of experiences. Basically, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm just want to know what your feelings were after that debate, and why you think that there's some quantum, um, yeah, something quantum about consciousness, shall I say, without trying to explain your theory for you.
Um, I will sort of like repeat a little bit what I said in that debate, which is that basically in order to understand consciousness and its problems, you need to basically analyze it in three levels of organization. These are actually from David Marr, a cognitive scientist in the 80s who wrote on vision, a very foundational book on visual perception. And basically, he proposes three levels of organization to use to analyze information processing systems. So the first layer is the computational level, which is basically how do you map the inputs to the outputs. That layer basically concerns what the system is doing from a very sort of like broad perspective. If you're like analyzing a simple object like an abacus that processes information, the computational layer is basically well, it can do sums, it can do subtractions, it can multiply, it can divide, and so on. And it can do it this fast. The second layer is the algorithmic layer. That is how is the information actually being processed and handled? What kind of representations does it use in order to accomplish what it's accomplishing? And the analogy with an abacus here would be, hey, the algorithm that you use is you associate one number to each of the beds, and whenever you want to increase the number, you move one bed to the right, and if the row is filled, then you turning back, and then you move a bed in the following row, and so on. All of those specific algorithms for how you process information. And finally, you have the implementation layer. The implementation layer may or may not matter for algorithms, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And in the case of the abacus, the implementation layer is basically, hey, is it made of wood? Is it made of metal? Is it an imaginary abacus? Because in fact, you can have an imaginary abacus, and it can work just as well in terms of improving your computational ability if you practice a lot with it. But you're still using an abacus in some sense. It's just that the implementation layer would be, hey, it's actually made of your own consciousness, or is a conscious representation. I would say that, hey, like analyze the properties of the mind at these three layers. Basically, you will say that, hey, actually, it is not only the case that this unity property of consciousness, that you're like simultaneously aware of multiple pieces of information. That's not only present on the computational and algorithmic layer. It's actually a feature of the implementation level. The unity is actually something that identifies what the experience, the properties of the experience are in sort of like basement reality. It's telling you how does it feel like, and actually what it's made of. Many people will actually just like want to say, hey, we have no way of knowing anything about the implementation layer or the algorithmic layer. And more so, it actually doesn't matter because all that you actually really care about is the input-output mapping. As long as you have like sensible, let's just like assume that actually all there is to consciousness. But yes, I would actually argue that the implementation layer is key, and more so the features of our experience are features of the implementation layer itself, and we can't ignore that. That's something that yes, I don't think Randall quite acknowledged for the most part, like stays at the computational and algorithmic layer, and doesn't really see the need to go anywhere else. Whereas that would point out, hey, like you're actually conscious of multiple pieces of information that actually gives you the need to go to the implementation layer as well.
Mm.
But yeah, he would argue that that there's actually only the appearance of simultaneity of our experience. And that actually what is going on is that you have many layers in the brain that are processing information, and on a given state, for a brain state, basically, all of the connections are like feeding back into the next state. And what a state can report is only the content of the previous state, because it's basically doing some operations on, in order to know like information about a particular state, you need to sort of like process it further so you actually can distill it. So in some sense, he argues that yeah, whenever we say that we are experiencing something, like whenever we say we are seeing two things at the same time, we are really just a new brain that is reporting on what the state of the brain was before. And we actually have like no true access to it. So there's like a bunch of things that we say, and there's no way of verifying that actually, hey, like that was actually the state of the brain before. I would reply that actually my statements about consciousness, that hey, I'm experiencing the left and the right side of my visual field at the same time, or I'm experiencing vision and sound at the same time. I'm not actually reporting something about a brain state. Like the very meaning of what I'm saying is talking about the nature of my experience. It's at least from a first-person point of view, it's very hard to actually not take that seriously. That yes, actually this unity is happening, and it's something that has to be explained. But yes, assuming that the unity of consciousness is actually something that happens at the implementation level of abstraction, then you actually require something unitary in the physical world to map to, like something that actually can give it a substance and reality. And the only thing that I know of actually in the universe that has the properties of one being unitary, like a ontologically unitary object, and two, containing pieces of information that is not just the one bit of information, is quantum coherent wave functions, where you actually have like a wave function that is coherent, so that if you interact with it in any part or from any degree of freedom, you're actually modifying the entirety of it. And yes, our experience has like many features like that. Like if you're looking at a blank screen and you see a red dot, the rest of your experience is entirely different than if you saw a white screen without the red dot. Basically, even the left right or the left right corner that is completely white that wasn't affected by the red dot. Its quality still changes because now it's a lower white corner that belongs to an experience with a red dot. So basically, the meaning and the feeling of it changes. In other words, if you affect any part of experience, you're affecting the entirety of it. In that sense, it's unitary, just as a quantum coherent wave function would be.
Okay. So, in a sense, he doesn't think that it's important for us to have these, have consciousness to go about doing exactly what we're doing. But what you're saying is, well, it may not be required, but in order for it to be more efficient, having a unitary experience that can experience ontologically unitary objects, many things at the same time, requires information processing that can deal with many calculations at the one time, and that's quantum. That fits well with the quantum wave function explanation. Is that correct? Something similar.
Yeah. The unitarity of it enables certain computation that is not accessible otherwise.
So in a sense, like a Turing machine wouldn't be able to achieve the same things given the same amount of time as like a quantum Turing machine.
Yes, correct. It would be able to achieve the same with arbitrarily,
Amounts of time. Yes.
arbitrary amounts of time.
Right.
But not within the same constraints. And yes, we seem to be very fine-tuned to actually be as fast as possible, and to take into account a lot of information when we are assessing dangerous environments or mates and so on.
Okay, that's interesting. Now you differ from Stuart Hameroff and the sort of the Choperian sort of quantum idea. I don't want to conflate Stuart Hameroff with Chopra, which is not fair for either of those people. But yes, the Penrose Hameroff explanation using microtubules to protect from decoherence, because there seems to be a lot of noise and heat going on in the brain that might decohere things at inconvenient moments. So yes, do you want to explain how your theory might differ from theirs? And I'm not sure what Chopra thinks actually, but
Penrose and Hameroff. So first of all, I would say that I currently don't identify any particular protein in the brain as basically where there's like shielding from decoherence and where consciousness actually, or like macroscopic quantum coherent consciousness may actually be going on. It may be the microtubules. I mean, there's like some arguments why it may be. There's like topological shielding from decoherence that they calculate. It may actually prevent decoherence all the way to like 10 to the minus 4 seconds, which is actually like very long times from a quantum point of view. And in that sense, like, yes, it's very encouraging. In that sense, like, their work is really interesting, and I think like very valuable to actually go into like looking at specific physiological processes that may contain the quantum process. I'm not actually in agreement with them when it comes to the way they interpret the relationship between the fundamentals of quantum mechanics and consciousness, where basically first they buy into the Copenhagen, well, actually not exactly. They buy into a collapse of the wave function interpretation of quantum mechanics, but their collapse, unlike in the Copenhagen interpretation, which happens when a scientist, like actually, or a scientist or a conscious observer makes an observation, and it's the conscious observation that makes a collapse. In Stewart's and Hameroff's theory, it's actually a objective phenomena that happens when a certain threshold of coherence is reached. They claim quantum gravity is responsible for the collapse. So there's like only so much that you can actually get in coherence, and then quantum gravity takes care of collapsing it. So it's not an observer that is making it collapse, and I think that's good. I mean, I really don't think like it's humans that are making the wave function collapse or anything like that. However, they identify consciousness with a moment of collapse specifically. It's sort of like suddenly consciousness is turned on when this collapse happens, and it's interesting because like it's like when this like corner case is happening in reality, maybe that's when consciousness is taking hold. Whereas in my view and in David Pearce's view, it's actually the states of superposition. They're actually the more conscious states, and there's no collapse at any given point that is actually a discrete event. It's actually a fully continuous and smooth event, process of decoherence. You call it splitting, the splitting of the possible worlds in quantum mechanics. And yes, we don't actually think that any sort of like collapse happens, and it definitely has never been observed. Whereas like smooth decoherence has a lot of evidence in favor of it. So I guess it's like it's a different ontology. I mean, there's like important agreements, which is to say that panpsychism is correct in some ways. They identify basically most objects as having just being made is basically lots and lots of little collapse events, like the chair, the rocks, air, and so on. But the collapses are trivial. They're like extremely tiny. So really, they're not minds at all. Whereas the brain is actually using that collapse for something useful by making it do some computational something computationally meaningful. And in that we agree. I mean, in the Pearson worldview, basically most of the world is made of extremely tiny micro experiences, like smaller than the size of an atom in most cases. And however, the brain and other particularly interesting corner cases actually produce very large experiences, extremely high here. So there's like those similarities, but the predictions are very different in terms of like what we will find. I guess one other thing to mention is that they don't, as far as I know, they don't actually go very much into binding, which is kind of puzzling because actually their collapse in a sense is something that could be used to address the phenomenal binding problem. Whereas David Pearson's and my view basically has a very strong focus on actually how binding happens. And we claim that local binding, on the one hand, we know through neuroscience that like local binding happens with synchronicity of neural networks, like when a neural network is representing the color red and a neural network is representing a square, these clusters of networks, when they get activated at the same time, then you experience the red as belonging to the square. So there's like this what's called local binding, when different features of your experience become attached to a unified object. What we claim is that actually, when this local binding is happening, this simultaneous activation of neurons, that's actually when you actually have the quantum coherence between the different neurons.
Wow.
Yeah, which is something that actually, yes, Stewart and Hameroff and Penrose don't particularly get into. It's sort of like, I guess in that sense, we're more detailed in the phenomenology. They're more detailed in the actual biomolecular physiology.
Right. Okay. So this is talking really about fundamental sort of views about how quantum mechanics would work to bring forth useful consciousness or useful computational qualia that allows for efficient processing. Now, okay, so it should be brought up that there has been observed quantum phenomenon in biology. Like, for instance, plants, different flowers can send like information around different parts of the flower using some sort of quantum walk. And then David brings up the fact that robins also have some form of quantum processing going on in their heads. Why not humans? Yes. So, what are your views on looking at other observations of quantum processing going on in nature? If we see it elsewhere, then should we also believe that there's a high degree of likelihood, increase our estimates of likelihood that it's actually happening in ourselves?
Yes, indeed, and yes. The amount of effects that actually, like, nonlinear and interesting effects in quantum mechanics have in terms of like how the macroscopic world unfolds, I think it's grossly underestimated in general. And yes, like at a micro scale, tiny microbes, I'm fairly confident that actually there's like many other quantum effects that are just poorly understood or like completely unknown at the current moment. That basically answer questions that we haven't even posed about how life works. Yes, one point to make, I think, is the notion of quantum Darwinism. That actually, when you look at quantum mechanics and the universe that they're simulating, there is this concept of selection pressures and evolution, it's completely ubiquitous. It's not just on the plane of animals and on the plane of sort of like large processes. It happens at the micro scale. On any given extremely tiny like subset of even a tiny cell, there's like tremendous competition that is happening at the quantum level. And the competition is mostly about leaving records of particular events. There's a whole sort of a theoretical framework for basically how to derive some of the equations of quantum mechanics, specifically the Born rule, how to calculate probabilities, just based on quantum Darwinism, just based on the idea that at the most minute level, there is competition for information to spread. And the information that is the best at spreading is the one that we end up learning about. In reality, actually, there's like a lot more going on at the micro scale. We just see the projections of it and the reflections of it that are good at being able to propagate. There's a lot of information that is lost that we just can't actually access, is too small. But basically, quantum Darwinism provides a framework for actually large quantum coherent wave functions to slowly evolve over time, taking hold of different functionalities in life. So you can imagine, hey, like you're not actually even quite talking about molecules and proteins selfishly reproducing. You're actually talking about quantum coherent wave functions selfishly reproducing. Themselves would have like protein markers, and they would be reflected in the particular DNA of the organism. But how they look like would actually be very different than actually like how we visualize proteins and other objects.
Hmm. So this quantum, I'm new to quantum Darwinism. So this is interesting. This so it's a useful framework for an explanation of why, not of why it would, maybe why information, why memory works in a sense, why there is increasingly useful bits of information which are being passed on in this sort of Darwinistic struggle. Why the more, I guess, fit explanations seem to survive, and because of at the micro scale, the it seems to be quantum mechanics which wins out above other sort of frameworks in terms of being able to efficiently spread um, effective information or fit information structures.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Am I missing something? Because it's just new to me and it's a bit of a brain bender.
No, indeed. It's extraordinarily strange, but yes, basically, selection pressures are for survival, but basically the currency is leaving traces of information. So yes, whatever actually like exists especially in a world like ours, exists because it's good at reproducing itself. So yes, basically the subcomponents of life may actually not. I mean, they of course they're like very, very well characterized to some extent by proteins and DNA, but what's actually happening in life has more to do with quantum coherent wave functions and like how they operate and how they are like in a Darwinian microenvironment produced by the structures of the cells and so on. Yeah, if we could sort of like look at the quantum component of cells, a lot more other things would happen than if you just visualize it in terms of protein and how proteins are interacting with one another.
Right. Wow. Good. I guess that would require, a few like hours worth of lectures and stuff. But look, this is really interesting. And like both Mike Johnson and I think Brian Tomasic had some interesting questions here regarding probing the types of experiments that we can scientifically, like science experiments that we can empirically test to see what's really going on. I mean, like it's great to theorize and use philosophy to sort of guide the type of experiments that we should be conducting in order to determine what truth there is. But on the other hand, we still need to validate these hypotheses that we create and try to test for. in the real world. But how to form these experiments is difficult. So,
Yes.
what kinds of Well, let's have a look at. Okay. Okay, so I guess Mike Johnson's question is more about the implementation level, but in terms of discovering what is actually going on, what types of experiments do you envision that will be possible within either today or in the near future to make sense of what's really going on, and also what you expect these experiments to produce, what sort of what they'll validate and what they will invalidate. Yeah, and what people will be surprised about. That's what I'd like to know.
Yes. Well, first of all, there's the experiment that David Pierce proposes,
Yeah.
which may be very far, actually very far into the future because it has like a couple technical difficulties that are very hard. But I can just summarize it. It's not very hard to explain. So the main idea is that you basically train a biological network, neural network in vitro to perform a classification task. So just as you can train in machine learning, you can basically create a little neural network that is trained to recognize cat pictures, as an example. Like whenever you show it a picture, it tells you whether there is a cat or not, and maybe even tells you where the cat is. So if you train a network like this, depending on the algorithm that you use, but there's many algorithms that end up basically recruiting individual neurons to signal particular features. And then the features can be like different levels of abstraction. I mean, sometimes the feature is an edge. It's like whenever there's an edge in a certain part of the screen, that neuron lights up. Other neurons are recruited to identify more complex things like squares, and then at the end you have like some neurons that classify like cats from different angles, and then you find like a neuron that classifies cats, which is like at the top of the hierarchy. And this is true for the brain. As far as we know, if you probe into the brain, there's like particular neurons that whenever you're shown a cat, the neuron gets activated, and never gets activated otherwise. And depending on how far you go in the hierarchy, the neurons respond to more or less complicated, compounded features. And the idea is that you would create this in vitro biological neural network. You would hook it up to an input and an output device, and you would train it to recognize cat pictures or something. And then you go in and you probe what is the functionality of each of the neurons. And you say, hey, like this is an edge detector, and this is a color detector, and a shape detector. Then you show, say, the network, you show a blue square. And then you look at the neuron that gets activated whenever there's blue, and you look at the neuron that's activated whenever there's a square. And what the theory predicts is that actually, when you have the two being activated simultaneously, it's not only that they are functionally simultaneous, but actually there's like quantum coherence going on between them. So at the time you present the stimuli that combines a blue and a square, you will actually be able to measure, if you can measure such thing, the superposition state of those two neurons. And there's basically three possible outcomes for the experiment. The first one is you don't see any states of superposition, like decoherence is just way too fast, and there's just nothing at the quantum level, nothing of relevance, at least between neurons. That would invalidate David Pierce's theory. The second possibility is that you do see weird quantum superposition states, but they don't correspond to what the network is supposed to be representing. So, for example, maybe the neuron that represents the color blue is in an entangled state with a neuron that represents a circle. But you presented a blue square. So actually the network of entanglements don't match what it's supposedly representing. So that would also invalidate the theory, because it would say that, hey, there is like non-trivial quantum entanglement happening here, but it's irrelevant for the computations. And then the third possibility, which is the predicted possibility, is that actually you will find entanglement in an isomorphic way. The structure of the entanglement will be isomorphic to the structure of the input, so that a blue square will not only activate simultaneously the blue neuron and the square neuron, also they will be in a state of quantum entanglement simultaneously. So that's the experiment. The most important hurdle or problem with that experiment is basically actually running an interferometry test to tell but what parts of the network are entangled with each other. And yeah, I don't know how to solve that within my lifetime. There might be very tricky and interesting ways of doing it. But I'm actually very optimistic. I think there's like many other tests that we can do that maybe they might not actually show 100% that a given theory is correct, but they would show evidence that would like slightly tilt our overall estimates. So one of them is basically testing functionalism. I mean, testing whether actually all there is to the brain is the interactions between the neurons at the neural level, and that quantum mechanics doesn't matter. That if you have like a supercomputer that simulates the interactions between the neurons, you're done. You will have a full intelligence. If you believe that, then it would follow that you would be able to cut a very thin slice of a brain and map out basically all of the connections in that very, very tiny slice and how is that connected to both sides that surround that slice, and then create a tiny layer of nanomaterials that basically in silicon replicate exactly the same functionality. But by construction, you make sure that there's decoherence that happens all the time.
So you engineer in decoherence to muck around, right? So that would invalidate like the first of the three possible outcomes of David Pearce's experiment, nothing of relevance between neurons, right? So if it works, if it can actually compute, then and you're basically inserting a whole heap of like decoherence such that quantum information, information like being passed from one neuron to another in a quantum state would be kind of lost, scrambled. Yes. So, but it wouldn't invalidate the second one. That the weird quantum states that don't correspond to the purpose of the computation of that neural network. But it would falsify the first of the three possible scenarios.
Yes. Yeah. Which would be very valuable, at least. And another very important one, basically, it's on the one hand, like the neuron doctrine, what I was explaining in functionalism, or like what functionalism usually tends to use, which is the neuron doctrine, the idea that all that matters for intelligence is the interconnections between the neurons and how the neurons like activate, what the action potential curve looks like, and so on. But that what doesn't matter is the proteins inside. That actually that's kind of irrelevant. Like you could implement that in so many different ways, and it wouldn't matter in any case. So we actually suspect that the proteins inside actually matter a lot, and there's like a lot going on there in terms of computation and entanglement. And one sort of like intuition for like why this is the case is that if you do lower like one electrode into any part of the cortex and you activate it, even in parts that have like very similar structure, you will have entirely different experiences. I mean, on the one hand, like you can have like this experience of intense blue light as an example, or you can have like this weird ineffable thought or this like strong sense of determination and so on. Very small differences in structure. Of course, you can say like there's very big differences in terms of like the overall structure of the brain and where that neuron is localized. But the differences are extremely different. There's one sort of like hypothesis that says actually the things that makes these experiences so different is that the qualia that they are contributing actually comes from the gene expression and the proteins inside each of these neurons. Some parts of the brain specialize in creating proteins that are really good at creating phenomenal color, so they become recruited for visual experience. And other neurons are very good at creating some other feelings and so on. And in the end, like training determines to largely like how they're connected, not so much what the initial palette of possible qualia you have. And this can be tested like actually not that difficult. Like it's not that difficult, and I think it's totally within our lifetimes if we put our minds to it, which is basically actually just modify the gene expression of different parts of the brain. Like literally go in with viruses and basically CRISPR engineering and change actually what proteins are being expressed. If you can try to transform some auditory neurons to look like more like color representing neurons, and in spite of not changing the relative connections between the neurons and other neurons, you start like experiencing this weird synesthesia. Whenever you hear a sound, you also experience color. That would be very suggestive that, hey, actually what matters is the structure there, not only the connections. So that's another theory. Another test, another way of testing it.
Okay, fantastic. Wow. It's mind-blowing. Yeah, so have you got any like links that I can provide people to for formal descriptions of these tests? Is this written anywhere or not?
I actually hold on. No, I don't think these two are written. They're in my to-do list.
Cool. Well,
Yeah.
here's some motivation for you to at least like try and write down first version drafts of these thought experiments or tests, because the quicker we can like get these down, the more critique you can get, and you might be able to refine these tests and whatnot. But yeah, of course, you're opening yourself up to a lot of criticism, and like it might be a bit sort of yeah, bit difficult. But still, I think having testable explanations is quite an important thing to have at this stage, because as you
Yes.
say, like this, if we look at maybe a Pascal's wager sort of view of whether consciousness is bound up with quantum phenomena, whether consciousness isn't bound up, it's just an epiphenomenon, whether consciousness exists at all. What are the priorities in like how we go about reducing suffering or and increasing happiness or and other stuff like that? It seems to be quite important foundational questions
Yes.
that can't be adequately addressed without empirical experiments to test what's really going on in the universe.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. But yeah, they will be written soon. I promise.
Good. And I'm very much looking forward to that. So yeah, now, okay, so bringing up, let's have a look at some of the questions that Brian Thomasek wrote, and he talked about digital consciousness here and artificial superintelligence in the next question. But okay, so the first question he brought up was this is a number of them. What probability do you assign to digital consciousness? Does the expected amount of digital sentience in the far future exceed the expected amount of biological sentience? And what would be the main forms of that sentience? Like, for instance, in post-human minds, scientific simulations or worker robots. And yeah, and how much can we best influence the trajectories to reduce the likelihood of suffering dense scenarios given the answers to the previous questions? That's probably a bit too much to take off. But yeah, in one,
Yeah,
it's a
no,
huge cluster of questions, but yeah. They're all
yes.
related, so I thought I might like put them all together.
That's yes. So the first one, yes. I mean, unfortunately, yeah, the expected amount of future digital suffering is very high. This because on the one hand, even though I assign a very low probability to digital sentience, I guess just to be clear, am I assigned like digital sentience in the sense of digital computers that use no quantum processing, being able to Yes,
That's
yes.
the premise behind digital consciousness in this.
Yes.
Brian's questions, I think.
The phenomenal binding problem is so hard that I do assign extremely small. Let's be clear. I will give it like 0.1% probability, which is because of the extreme explosion of sentient intelligence that would happen if digital consciousness is possible, then yes, unfortunately, the expected amount of future suffering is huge, even though again, like the probability is small. What I take from that, so like when I've talked with friends of Brian Tomazic and himself, the general attitude is like, okay, yes, like just consider that you may be wrong about digital sentience and just calculate the expected amount of suffering. And I agree, the expected amount of suffering is way worse than biological organisms. My response to that is not, hey, let's actually then just like largely focus on that, which it is very sensible. It's actually let's actually invest many more resources into figuring out for sure whether digital sentience is possible or not. The reasoning that they tend to have is that we have explored everything that we could explore in there, that the philosophical case is sort of closed, that maybe there's like some loose ends, but the rough outlines of what could be argued are closed. So there's like really no point. It's sort of like just wasting time to continue to wander in that space. And for that reason, it's just like simply rational to just go ahead and focus on just like a functionalist approach to consciousness that includes digital sentience. And yes, my main, I guess, counter argument to that is that I do think it's very likely that we will come up with very good tests to actually be able to determine whether consciousness can exist in a digital computer or not. And because I'm so optimistic about it, I think actually investing a lot of resources into it is the right way to go. Especially like hey, let's assume that I'm correct that not that I'm correct that digital sentience is impossible, but that I'm correct in that we can actually test it for sure. If that is true, and instead I were to sort of back up and just go with the expected suffering argument, there is this scenario where actually, hey, I was right to begin with, and digital sentience is impossible, but we are wasting all of our resources into this imagined terrible scenario that will never happen. So in that case as well, there's like a tremendous loss. So that's why I do take it upon myself, and anybody else who wants to help me, anybody else who's doing it in parallel as well, to actually figure out a way to convince skeptics that convince skeptics that consciousness cannot be instantiated in digital form.
Right. Now, when you're talking about digital form, I guess there's some assumptions here about what the architecture can be, like just ones and zeros. But there's no quantum processing going on at all. And it's in silicon. It's in a basic substrate it wasn't really meant for that sort of type of processing. But let's just say, okay, so let's just say that we develop quantum computers that can run simulations of minds and all that sort of thing. Surely the same argument would apply. Yes, extreme amounts of suffering would be possible if we could have quantum machines, quantum computers running simulations of minds that can actually allow for simulated minds to have like a unified binding of experiences. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So are you pointing out that in some sense most of the future suffering and well-being will be in machine form perhaps rather than biological?
Yeah. So in a sense, would you classify a quantum computer as biology that could actually host a consciousness, right?
I would. It depends on how far advanced. Like at some point, if it's like nanotechnology, I might still preserve the word biology just for things that evolve naturally.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So in that case, it would be, if do you believe that like sentiences that have consciousness could exist on quantum computers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you
And
believe then, if that's the case, then the same argument that Brian might, or the same questions that Brian has, whether he's talking about digital or quantum, like as long as consciousnesses can be sort of simulated in computational environments, do you then expect that digital sentience would exceed the amount of biological sentience?
yes. Well, if you update the digital meaning it also including quantum computing, then yes. Yeah. No, and I think also once we actually basically create sentient quantum computers, it's a lot more scalable. I mean, basically you can make it modular. You can basically just like scale the part that is relevant for consciousness, and just not scale the parts that are irrelevant. And you could arguably get like much more intense and much more streamlined and efficient ways of transforming energy into conscious experiences. So yeah, the bulk of consciousness would probably happen from some artificial way of creating the conditions for consciousness.
Okay, so it makes sense that if we are going to create machines that that like worker robots or machines that functionally replace the need for suffering in biology or even quantum simulations, then these machines shouldn't be conscious in themselves. So it's interesting. Is there any like replacements for suffering that would work just as well as suffering without the conscious aspect?
Yes, there is. And I think that's like actually another subtle point that maybe Brian Tomasic and foundational research and quality computing, there's like a little bit of a disagreement there too, which is with regards to valence. I mean, basically what makes an experience positive. And it seems that Brian Tomasic is very skeptical that actually you can't do any useful information processing without at least involving like some anxiety or feelings of danger and so on, because you're dealing with resources, and if you're actually doing something useful, you're calibrating in such a way that hey, like more or less 50% of the times you will fail, because like that's actually when you're doing something useful. In which case like maybe suffering is intrinsic to intelligence in these levels, and it's just like better to just not have computation at all. Whereas I think that no, you can actually hack states of pure bliss, and really forget about computation. And you can also pretty much do any computation with like laws of bliss as well. That maybe would get in the way a little bit, but not enough to actually make it impossible. I mean, for the most part, all else being equal, computation with consciousness will be the most efficient if you only care about efficiency. If you add the constraint of, hey, it also has to be pleasant, yes, it's less likely to be optimal, for sure. But at least it is very likely to be the most positive one. So you do have that. And I do think you can have like, yes, basically near analogs of any functionality that behaves exactly the same. I mean, let me one example I can come up with is basically you can have a person acting like they needed to pay taxes and to sort of like do very menial jobs and very boring jobs, and acting like they're actually having a bad time and not enjoying it. Whereas in fact they took ecstasy or a strong euphoria. I mean, basically they still have a preference architecture. They still want to get done with the taxes and so on. And sure, being in a state of bliss might make them a little bit less efficient, but overall you're still achieving the same functionality without actually involving suffering. So I don't think it's any hard constraint. We can get it done.
Okay. And Brian's other question was? What's your probability that AGI, not necessarily conscious, just highly intelligent, is possible in principle and will actually happen in practice? That is, yeah. So, what are your thoughts on AGI timelines and takeoff scenarios? What will it be like? What do you make of Bostrom vision of artificial general intelligence, super
Yes,
intelligence?
yes.
Yes.
So I think
So
like
I
the
think like the
fastest
fastest
recursively
recursively
self-improving loop
self-improving loop
that there will
there
be
will
in the
be in the
future,
future,
and the one
and
that
the
will
one that
actually
will
matter
actually
for the
matter for the
purpose of the
purpose of the
evolution
evolution
of the
the
universe
universe
will
will
likely
likely
be
be
actually
actually
genetic
genetic
engineering
engineering
and
and
self-editing.
self-editing.
You might
You
have
might
like a
have like a
period where,
period where
yes, like this
there's like
big
this big
effort, maybe in
effort, maybe in
China, maybe
China,
somewhere
maybe
else,
somewhere else,
to
to
clone
clone
many von
many von
Neumanns,
Neumanns,
many
many
Feynmans,
Feynmans,
many
many
Sasha
Sasha
Shulgins.
Shulgins. I mean,
Lots of like
lots of like
very bright
very bright
individuals that
individuals
have
that have
actually
actually
seem like their
seem like their
genetic makeup
genetic
seem
makeup
to be
seem to be
hitting some
hitting
kind of
some kind of
jackpot
jackpot in terms
of like what
what
the brain
the
is
brain
actually
is actually
capable of
capable
doing.
of doing.
And they would
And they would
be
be
basically
basically
cloning them,
cloning them,
adding
adding
variations,
variations, raising them in
optimally
optimally
enriched
enriched
environments,
environments,
and
and
seeing
seeing
maybe by the
maybe by
age of
the age of
10, like
10, like
how
actually
smart
how
they
smart
are,
they are,
what
what
problems they can
problems they
solve.
can solve.
If
If
they
they
show
show
extraordinary
extraordinary
ability at the
ability
age
at
of
the age of
10,
10,
you can
you can
clone them
clone them
again and
again
add
and
more
add more
variations. You
variations.
don't
You
need to
don't need to
wait 20
wait 20
years,
years,
basically.
basically.
The
The
recursively
recursively
self-improving loop
self-improving
can
loop
be
can be
fairly
fairly
quick. At
quick.
first,
At
it might
first,
take
it might
several
take several
decades,
decades,
each
each
iteration and
iteration,
so
and
on.
so on.
But very
But
quickly,
very
will
quickly, we'll
basically
basically
get going
get going
because
because
the
the
very, very,
very,
very
very,
bright
very bright
individuals,
individuals,
they will
they
also
will
start
also
like
start like
experimenting with
experimenting with
psychedelics,
psychedelics,
experimenting with
experimenting with other ways of
altering their
altering their
consciousness,
consciousness,
and
and
yes,
yes,
basically
basically
figuring out how
figuring out how
consciousness
consciousness
works,
works,
figuring
figuring
out
out
how
how
to
to
recruit
recruit
it
it
for
for
computational
computational
purposes,
purposes,
and
and
super
super
intelligence
intelligence may
may be
may
born
be
that
born
way.
that way.
In which
In which
case,
case,
yes, actually
yes, actually
the
the
ethics and
ethics
the
and the
objectives
objectives
of
of
the
the
organization
organization and the
that are
individuals that
running
are running
that sort of
that sort of
enterprise
enterprise
will matter
will
a lot
matter a lot
for what
happens
happens
afterwards.
afterwards. And the
And the
takeoff, I think,
takeoff,
yeah,
I think, yeah,
I'm more
I'm
of a
more of a
takeoff
takeoff
person than a
person than a
gradual
gradual
replace
replace
replacement person.
replacement
I
person.
think there's
I
going
think
to be
there's going
some
to be
kind of
some kind
phase
of phase
change where
change
yes,
where
there's a
yes, there's a
critical
critical
mass
mass
of
of
extremely
extremely intelligent people
who
who
themselves are
themselves
able
are
to
able to
hack at
hack
least
at
some of
least some
them
of them
into
into
some
some
qualitatively
qualitatively
superior form of
superior form of
intelligence.
intelligence.
And
And
yes, I
yes,
mean
I mean
the
the
existence of the
existence of the
possibility of a super
possibility of a
intelligence, I think
superintelligence,
it's
I think it's
extremely
extremely
likely.
likely.
So this is similar to David's idea of the biointelligence explosion.
Yes,
Yes,
a
a
biointelligence
biointelligence
explosion.
explosion.
Eventually,
Eventually,
yes,
yes,
everything
everything
might happen
might
in
happen in
artificial
artificial
quantum
quantum
supercomputer.
supercomputer.
But to get
But to get
there, I think
there, I think
we will
we will
first
first
require
require some
biointelligence
biointelligence
explosion.
explosion.
Okay, well that feeds into the question I had in my mind to ask you next is what do you think the likelihood is that we'll be able to create quantum supercomputers that will be able to process information with qualia in a very efficient manner, such that it'll be able to have phenomenal binding and the experience quality of information processing that makes that will achieve more important forms of information processing in the future.
Very
Very
likely. I mean,
likely. I mean, I think
it's
it's
possible to
possible
do.
to do.
Evolution.
It's just
Evolution.
too hard now for us in
Yes,
our
yes,
stage of intelligence to be able to work out how to do it.
Yes,
yes. And I
think
also
you
think
can't
you can't
bootstrap
bootstrap
yourself from a
yourself from a
purely
purely
non-sentient
non-sentient
intelligence
intelligence
to get
to
there
get there
as well.
as well.
For
For
the same
the same
argument,
argument,
as I was
as I
saying,
was
that like
saying, that like
in an
in an
economy
economy
of trading
trading
information about the
information about
state
the
space of
state space of
consciousness,
consciousness,
a
a
non-sentient
non-sentient
AI
AI
is
is
useless
useless
compared to
to
an
an
empathetic
empathetic
one.
one.
For very
For very
similar
similar
reasons,
reasons, in
to
order
actually
to
make
actually make
progress into
progress into
figuring out
figuring out
what
what
new
new
varieties of qualia you should recruit and
and yeah,
how you
you
connect
should
them to
connect them
each
to
other.
each other.
You need to
Actually
actually
be
be conscious
conscious
to do that
to do
work.
that work.
Right. So an AI may, in its efforts to achieve goal X, as an instrumental goal, as like a goal that falls out of the main goal, try and recruit qualia
Yes.
in order to more efficiently achieve its goal X, whatever that might be.
Yes.
And then, maybe even change its goals or whatnot.
Right.
As a result of doing so. Yeah.
Yes. How it would figure out that it needs to. I'm puzzled. But maybe somebody may actually program it to try to figure it out. It's
Well, is there any form of decision theory that you can come up with which which would logically give like an AI reason to explore in this area? Well, you said that more efficient computation, for instance.
Yeah.
We brought up the Mary's room. What would an AI be able to do if it had experience, if it could do raw feeling, if it then compared to what it wouldn't? Now, I framed the question in the past is like earlier in the interview about how would it treat us? How would it approach ethics? But how would it just approach solving problems if it had experience to raw feels compared to if it didn't?
Yes. Very differently. Yes. But yes, I'll have to think more about whether or how non-sentient AI could actually bootstrap itself into figuring out that hey, humans seem to be doing something computationally efficient that I have no way of explaining, and how do I go about like actually replicating it? Yes, it sounds yeah. I mean, that would be a very peculiar way of getting there. That actually it's standard AI researchers who create a non-sentient AI that figures out it has to be sentient and then becomes sentient and then interacts with us. But yeah,
there could be efficiency reasons, but also qualitative reasons. In order, maybe, and I don't know too much about like AI theory, where it's up to in trying to have AIs understand what it means, what concepts actually mean, and how the meanings of concept A, how much that is required in order to branch and make use of concept B, and how to interrelate them. It basically making sense of the universe. Do you think qualia is required for making real sense of the environment?
Yes. Yes, to actually put together pieces of information. I mean, even what the meaning of a square is like requires to actually sit together simultaneously, like four lines and four dots, and put them together. Yeah. Otherwise, like the very meaning doesn't exist. So the binding is actually fundamental for meaning making.
So in a sense, like you could argue, if we take that as a premise, and that there's some quantum aspect there to it that like is currently not accessible to digital computers, that it would be required, at least in principle, to make sense in order to achieve great engineering feats that you know. That we may require in order to survive in the universe or to solve existential risks and global catastrophic risks, that an AI needs to efficiently make sense of all the information before it, not just crunch it and spit out output, right?
Right. Yes. I mean, a good example might be, for example, like figuring out what humans will want in a new environment.
Right. Yeah, concurrent extrapolation. Extrapolated volition, yeah.
Right.
Yudkowsky-Wrights are called, yeah. That's true, okay. Right. Let's talk about, I think Mike Johnson's question is quite interesting. What technology for exploring consciousness would be possible to make with today's level of science and technology? But nobody has actually gone through the formality of actually creating or making yet.
Yes.
In other words, what can we do today?
Yes. I mean, basically exploring the information content of experience and trying to basically modify it that way. So there's some things I talk about with Mike Johnson, and I actually have in my website. specifically in one article called Peaceful Qualia, where I basically discuss a particular intervention that you could do to some extent create very high states of well-being in a pro-social way that actually helps motivates people to help each other. But one of the main ideas is the concept of qualia and kneeling. So there's like these phenomena in physics where if you have, for example, a lattice of like magnetized atoms or something like that, like iron or something, and you look at the orientation of the real magnets, or like where they're aligned. They may start like all chaotic. Like they may start like completely randomly shuffled, and there's like no coherent organization. And if they start chaotic and you start very cold, they will never organize themselves in a coherent way. They're like interlocked and just like stuck there. If you raise the temperature, basically each of the little magnets will increase the probability that they will like randomly flip and interact with the surrounding ones in a slightly different way. In some sense, they will align themselves better with the surrounding ones. And if you increase the temperature very much, what ends up happening is that you have these chaos, like this very intense noise. All of the orientations are randomly flipping all the time, and nothing is being achieved. That's if you heat up iron to the point that it's melted, that's what you see. It's just there's no magnetic alignment of any sort. But then what you can do is cool it very slowly. Sometimes with like some seed that itself is like aligned or with an external magnetic field or something like that. But basically a little bias towards being aligned. And if you cool it very slowly, then the whole structure can become aligned. All of it at once. Now they're like in a perfect orientation. All of the atoms. And in this sense, it's sort of like, hey, you created a lot of order, a lot of order relevant for this system by doing relatively little work. I mean, the only thing that you did was control the temperature. You never interacted with a single one of those atoms individually. Likewise, are there things like that in consciousness? I mean. Mike Johnson and I, we hypothesized that actually valence, like how good an experience feels, has to do with how well ordered it is. So there's like some ways of basically quote unquote raise the temperature of your consciousness, just increase the amount of free energy. And if you can pull it in a very slow, steady way, you may be able to arrive at a highly ordered and robust state afterwards. And yes, with current technology, I think like some proprietary combinations of TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, and transcranial direct current stimulation, and yes, some legal compounds as well. That actually like can get neuroplasticity started. And things of that nature. Basically playing with the overall pattern and organization consciousness. Again, with the overall idea of getting a lot of mileage out of very little effort. Like when you create a magnet with annealing.
Wow. So, wow, consciousness. You could literally reprogram your brain to experience more valence in a good direction if you were very careful about just TMS and legal compounds. So you can rewire your brain to be effectively on MDMA, right?
Yes.
For good, without the side effects or anything. That sounds awesome. So where do I get some? Have you already done this? No. Right.
No, but there's like some suggestions that something like annealing is possible. Especially relating to the effect of set and setting in psychedelics. Like how like in some very peaceful cases, people can actually feel drastically better afterwards. And it seems to have something to do with this like increased chaos to destruct the current structures and then let it cool in a very careful way. And yes, I'm very optimistic about this.
Mike actually calls them pattern pharmaceuticals as opposed to pharmaceuticals.
Pharmaceuticals, yes.
Yes.
Would you consider yourself a patternist in terms of like your theory of mind? Like Ben Goetzel's written before, he's written a book on the hidden pattern.
Right. I would say that pattern like the problem with the word patterns is that semantically it again invokes the issue of like digital computers where basically a pattern doesn't have to be unified in any special way to account as a pattern. So when many people think of like patternism as a theory of consciousness, again the phenomenal binding problem doesn't tend to be addressed. However, patternist with unity, where you actually have the capability of unity, then yes, I think actually all of the contents of our experience are contained in the patterns of quantum entanglement that compose our mind. So in that sense, yes, a patternist, but within an asterisk, which is patternist plus binding operations.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Wow. That's awesome. All right. And I guess largely more along the quantum mechanics line, people are interested in cryonics and they don't want to lose their sentience. They want to be woken up or re-resuscitated into like a digital realm after having their brain spliced up and scanned and uploaded into a computer. I guess that's one approach to suspension and reanimation. So in practical terms, what difference does the degree to which quantum mechanics is involved in consciousness make to the efforts to preserve brains and bodies of people for future revival via cryonics and chemical brain preservation? And should someone like Max Moore or Ken Hayworth have become convinced that quantum mechanics play a crucial role in consciousness, should they do their preservation activism differently? How do you preserve like a mind whose important aspects of experience are bound up with quantum mechanics?
Yes. There is a very big connection, and depending on actually what quantum effects are underlying, things such as memory and automatic learning and so on. There can be profound effects. I happen to think that actually memory is actually very robust, and probably I suspect that we will actually get really good at cryogenesis, cryonics, where we will be able to revive people, and they will have consciousnesses that look very similar to the ones they had before. At least from a first person point of view, I don't think it will be noticeable. The way I think about it is, hey, actually, when you're talking about the brain, I mean, you again may think of it as sort of like this unified identity that preserves itself over time. Again, in the close individualistic sense, and you may be afraid that maybe something essential is being lost when you go through cryonics and you're revived. But I don't think there's actually anything essential to a person's identity. There's like a lot of aggregated information and structure in a particular way. As long as you get like 99.5% of it recovered, I think it will be good enough. People won't be complaining. And it won't feel like you're an entirely different person either. And also the part that is lost is probably relatively unimportant as well, relative to what you can preserve. Maybe one intuition for thinking about it this way is again thinking of the brain as kind of a Darwinian ecosystem for different patterns, quantum patterns to arise that are like good at solving the problems that the brain requires to solve at the given moment. So as a Darwinian environment, the brain will continue to be itself after it gets defrozen. And in some sense, on any given moment in time, our experience is changing, and it's different and satisfying different constraints, and a slightly different brain is generating. And I don't think the difference will be like much larger than that. That said,
That said, there are like some
scenarios.
scenarios. I mean, like
if you really
for
think that, for
example,
the very
the very
fine
fine
structure of
microtubules
actually matters for
for
personality
personality or personal
identity,
identity, then
not doing
not doing
properly
cryonics
could actually
properly could
mess it up
actually mess it up entirely,
irreversibly.
irreversibly.
So yeah,
So
there's
yeah, there's that
possibility.
possibility.
But yeah,
But yeah, I suspect actually it's
very
very
possible
possible
to have like
to have
minimal
like
damage.
minimal damage.
Okay, so in a sense, in principle, it's possible to preserve brains in such a way where there's minimal damage, and the most important aspects of identity and selfhood would be preserved and able to be recovered. It's just the method of preserving that you might be concerned about.
Yes.
Preserving the right aspects. Okay, so do you think just preserving the connectome will be enough?
Um,
Assuming
that
that
the
the
protein
protein
structures in the cells
remains roughly the same.
yes, or at
Yes,
least like
or at least like
if they don't change
they don't
enough,
change
yes,
enough, yes,
the connectome
the
should
connectome
be.
should be.
Well, let me think.
Well, let me think.
I was kind
I
of
was
thinking
kind
in
of
terms of
thinking
like
in terms of like reviving,
Oh, yes,
and
sorry.
where like yes, like the protein
like the protein structures
remain
remain there,
and like the
and like
memories
the
that may
memories
be
that may be
encoded in
encoded
some
in
aspects
some
of the
aspects of the
microtubules or like in
microtubules or like in other
proteins
proteins
or
or
other
other
patterns of
entanglement,
they're
they are
preserved.
preserved.
But if you're
But
talking
if you're
about the
talking about the
connectome in the sense
connectome
of
in the sense of
putting it into
putting it into a
quantum
quantum
supercomputer
supercomputer
and
and
simulating there, I
simulating
think
there, I
actually the
think actually
connectome
the
would
connector
be
would
not
be
enough
not enough
information.
information.
You would actually
You would
you
actually
would be
you
missing
would
out
be
on
missing out
what
on
you're
what
connecting
you're
with what.
connecting with what.
Not only
Not only
like
not
yeah,
only like
neurons
yeah,
are more
neurons
than
are
their
more than their
connections.
connections.
Okay, cool. So let's. What if the supercomputer just read the connectome of a brain and then extrapolated a distribution um, of protein structure
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
sort of common to many brains
Oh
in a
yes.
sense. That wasn't yours, but it's just like this is how they commonly operate, and I'm going to like fill in the blanks, fill in the areas where there are no protein structures. Basically using like an algorithm to do so in an intelligent sort of generalized way.
Yes.
Would that be enough?
I
I
suspect
suspect
not
not
enough for
enough for
memory,
memory,
because
because
may
memory
actually
may
involve
actually
the
involve the
particular
particular like
so
so
basically
basically
on a
on a
given
given
occasion where
occasion where some
some information
information is written down,
protein
protein
structures in
structures in very
separated parts of the
separated
brain may
parts of the brain may
actually like
actually like
synchronize.
synchronize.
So
So
if you don't
if you
know that
don't
hey
know
like
that
it's
hey
not
like
only
it's
about
not
like
only about like
which proteins
which
are
proteins
where,
are
it's also
where,
how they
it's
have
also
been
how they
affected
have
by
been affected by
experience.
experience.
In which
In
case,
which
yeah, you
case, yeah,
wouldn't be
you
able.
wouldn't be
I mean,
able.
I think you
I
would
think
be
you
able to
would be able to
reconstruct
reconstruct
the intelligence,
for
but the
example.
memories
The
might be
memories might
completely
be
messed up.
completely messed
Like, it
up.
might be
It
something
might be
like that.
something
Like
like
it would
that.
be,
Like it would be,
hey, like
hey, like
somebody that
somebody
behaves
that
very
behaves
similar
very
to you
similar
and
to
has
you and
like
has
similar
like similar
proclivities.
proclivities.
Their senses
Their
might be a
senses
little
might
bit
be a
messed
little bit
up.
messed
Like
up.
even
Like
for
before
cilantro,
cilantro,
if it was the case
if it
that
was the
before
case that before cilantro was
a terrible
a terrible
smell, like
smell,
maybe now
like
you
maybe
like
now
it
you like
because
it because
like you have
like you have a
the more
the
typical
more
gene
typical gene
expression
expression
for
for
that part of the
that
brain.
part of the brain.
But then
But
memories
then
might be
memories
completely
might be
messed up.
completely messed up.
Right.
But
Okay.
I
But
don't know.
I
I mean,
don't know. I
memories
mean,
could be
memories
just
could be just
interconnectome. I
interconnectome.
really doubt
I
it.
really doubt it.
Okay. So in a sense, would you consider yourself a functionalist, but not? Okay. So if you would you consider yourself a functionalist? I'll just ask that question.
No,
No,
because
because
you have to
you have
modify
to modify
functionalism to
functionalism
get it right.
to get it right.
But
But
yeah, I would consider
yeah, I would
myself
consider
something
myself
similar
something
to
similar to
functionalism.
functionalism.
What
It's
aspects of functionalism would you require to modify to be more in line with your ideas?
the basic yeah, the basic one is
basic
the
one is the
binding
binding
operation,
operation,
which is in
which is in
addition to
addition to
functionalism. I mean, it's
functionalism. I mean,
addition to
it's
form and
addition to form and
function.
function.
I
Oh
mean,
yes,
I
yeah,
mean,
of course, right, yeah. But I mean, like, in a sense, I was just thinking, like, if somebody like Randall and Keith Wiley would be interested in only providing, like, only sort of uploading the connectome, and that would be enough. You would agree that that might be able to produce something, but with a really bad memory or with a scrambled memory, maybe with no identity. But if you preserve the protein structure and uploaded that as well, it's just a deeper level, albeit a much more deeper level. But it still, in principle, would be possible because the quantum properties would boot up if it was if it was represented in a quantum enabled computer.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So an analogy
would be like
how to get like
superfluid helium,
where superfluid helium is like what happens when you
cool down
certain kind of helium
to like a sufficiently
low temperature that you actually get like this very weird fluid. And the fluid is a
unitary object
according to
quantum mechanics.
It's actually a one wave function, quantum coherent wave function that is macroscopic, similar to how we claim consciousness is. But the thing is, like if you're actually trying to simulate that in a classical computer, simulating superfluid helium, you will require an extremely huge supercomputer. At some point, there's a threshold in which actually the quantum effects start to dominate, and then computationally it explodes. But if you actually do have the materials, you don't need to simulate. You can just lower the temperature and you will get the phenomenon. So likewise, if you just have like enough pieces of information about the composition of a given brain, you don't need to simulate it. You just need to put it together, and the quantum component will happen just because stuff is actually made of quantum materials, and those materials interact as they should in that environment.
Okay, so you don't need to preserve a continuum of quantum phenomena, as long as you preserve the structure to the right degree. What's required to be preserved is the structure, and as long as you refabricate or put together the exact same structure, then the quantum will basically boot up from where it was left off last time the structure was active. Okay, cool. All right, that's interesting. All right, well, so I mean that's about the most I had to ask about the mind uploading cryonics aspects. Now I'm just wondering, like, about back to the suffering aspect. I'm not sure whether we really covered this off, but how do we go about taking the premises that we have currently discussed, that we've previously discussed during this interview? How then do we go about then mitigating suffering? How do we? What strategies do you see as being the most important to follow, given the premises that you have?
Yes. My current approach is basically to be able to create super happiness first.
Okay.
Probably should go in parallel with other people who just try to eliminate suffering as a first strategy. That's actually my first impulse, to just go at suffering first. But for various practical reasons, I think a plan that actually incorporates super happiness as a stepping stone is more likely to actually work out. I mean, largely, if you do create super happiness, and you have universal ethics, utilitarian, hedonistic, and so on. And actually you can benefit from selling the technology. Then you have like all of the resources on the one hand, and on the other hand you also have strategic alignment. I mean, a lot of people who know the value of what you're working on because they have experienced the super happiness themselves. They know there's actually like something behind it. Yes, you would have like strategic alignment and resources to be able to tackle the actual problem of suffering. And I also suspect that the best way to tackle the problem of suffering is to substitute it by super happiness. So one example is if we could engineer chickens. this is a very inefficient way of doing it, but it's for illustration. If we can engineer chickens
that are
super happy,
and that
they
cost
maybe
the same
or
perhaps like a little bit less than factory farm chickens, but they produce the same quality of meat
and so on.
Substituting
the current chickens that are being used
for getting
meat
meat by super happy chickens would basically eliminate the problem of factory farming,
at least for chickens.
It might be unethical on the account that you're limiting the degrees of freedom to these sentient organisms, and I think there's like something to that. But at least you're removing the big hot problem, which is intense suffering that happens as a consequence. So if you can find simple technologies, even things such as helmets that you can wear, or like little genetic editing to at least cut off the worst of suffering, and you can apply it to factory farmed animals. That would be just such a huge improvement. Again, the factory farm, it's very likely that actually other things will happen before anybody allows me to replace them by super happy chickens and so on. But as an example, likewise in nature, I think our responsibility is to make sure that every sentient being that actually is born on the planet has a good life. So we should aim to engineer wild animals. The conservative approach is to make as few changes as possible, such that they now experience as little suffering as possible. A more radical approach is to actually replace them by super happy animals. That may or may not have the same functionality. I mean, in the end, you might be able to re-engineer the ecosystem from scratch. So you're not actually attached to the current structure of the ecosystem, but Yes, the way in which I envision basically eliminating suffering is by replacing it with super happiness rather than eliminating it and just eliminating it.
Okay, that's cool. So, I mean, like, would you consider yourself a classical utilitarian?
Not really. I mean, I treat like a value positive states, but I think there's a priority, at least a moral priority to address states of suffering first. Which sounds ironic.
Yeah. You think that there's some way that you can, there's some commensurability between like suffering and bliss, in a sense that you can trade off bliss for suffering to a degree.
Yeah, to a degree, yes.
Right.
So it is classical utilitarian, just like the currency might be biased towards suffering. I mean, it may be completely delusional. I mean, like really, like a full understanding of qualia and valence may give us a mathematical structure that says yes, like actually pleasure and pain cancel out perfectly. And classical utilitarianism is correct. But there's always the worry of empty individualism. I mean, if you are like a time slice in the multiverse, basically if you're in a state of suffering, there's nothing that anybody can do to compensate you for it, because you already spent your one chance to exist in a state of suffering. So I don't really know that actually classical utilitarianism works out, because you can't actually trade the value of the experiences between the entities, which is kind of what you would need to have it cancel out. In closed individualism and open individualism, classical utilitarianism makes more sense, because you can say, hey, I'm gonna suffer a little bit now, but then I will reap the benefits later. And in that sense, maybe it cancels out if you do exist over time. But if empty individualism is correct, then just very tragic. There's just entities that are just in states of suffering. Period. And in that case, I just don't want any more of those. I'd rather just make sure they don't exist before making sure that positive ones do exist.
It brings into question like population ethics and the sort of axiology questions about average and total interpretations of utilitarianism and the whole the whole problem of the what is it, the repugnant conclusion that Derek Parfit wrote about. So yeah, would you bias yourself between like would you prefer an average well-being across time, or would you prefer a total, like the total well-being to be prioritized?
Oh yes.
It's
Well, it's the total,
undoubtedly.
undoubtedly.
yeah, okay, yeah. It's a difficult question because you have to swallow the whole repugnant conclusion pill, then, don't you? And say,
Right.
well, yep,
Right.
okay, I'd be more happy to have billions of very, very lightly happy people,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
people without any suffering, than a few extremely happy people. And with if the total amount of happiness was more than
Yes. Yes.
the amount there. But well, I mean, like it just sounds a little bit wrong. I mean, I'd prefer total as well if they were the only two options. But
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
there's got to be more progress to be made in population ethics. Just wondering where you think where you think research directions might take us, or
Yeah.
It's like
I mean,
I mean,
it's just like
it's just like
I
I
like
like
to
to
apply
apply
it
it
within a
within
given
a given
entity. I mean,
entity. I mean, sort of like
thinking of it
thinking
within
of it within
a
a
lifespan.
lifespan. So
The
the
repugnant
repugnant
conclusion
conclusion
basically is
basically
kind of
is kind of
equivalent of like,
equivalent
would
of
you
like, would you
rather like
rather like
always
always
be like
be like
happy,
happy,
or
or
just be
just be
barely above
barely above
neutral
neutral most of the time,
but then
but
like
then like
have a
have a
couple like
couple like
mystical
mystical
experiences that seem
experiences
to
that seem
explain
to explain
everything, and you
everything,
have like
and you have
this
like this
actually like transcendental experience once in a while. And
and
I
I
actually
think I
would
actually
prefer the
would prefer
second
the
one
second one
because
because
it's
it's
a lot
a
more
lot more
informative about
informative
actually
about actually
what is there.
what is there.
In the experiment,
In the
of course,
experiment,
like
of
the
course, like the
information
information
you
you
gain
gain
from
from
it
it
doesn't
doesn't
matter.
matter.
It's
It's
just
just
about
about
the utility
the
of the
utility of the
experiences
experiences
themselves.
themselves. But
Yeah, I would have the
yeah, I would have the
intuition
intuition
that
that
yes,
yes,
like
like
the more
the more
variable,
variable,
it's better.
it's better. But
When you put it
when you put
across
it
people,
across
then
people,
yes,
then
like
yes,
the
like
sense of
the sense of
unfairness
unfairness just
arises.
arises.
Which again,
Which again,
to me, it also
it also
arises when just
arises when just
you think of
you think
empty
of empty
individualism. I mean,
individualism. I
even
mean,
across
even
one
across
person.
one person.
If me in
If
the
me in the
afternoon is happy,
afternoon is
but me
happy,
in
but me
in the
in
morning
the
is
morning is
unhappy,
unhappy,
that also
that
seems
also
like
seems like
pretty
pretty
unfair for
unfair
the
for the
entity
entity that
me in
is
the
me in
morning.
the morning.
So
So
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's a pretty it's a difficult, but do you think there will be much progress? Do you consider yourself an ethical realist, or do you think there's actual? Do you think ethics can be measured objectively? Do you think there's universe sort of patterns and unified patterns in the universe that equate to real suffering and real happiness, in a
right,
sense,
right.
that is measurable and not just
Yes,
relative.
yes,
I think so.
I think so.
I think
I
that
think that
suffering
suffering
and pleasure
and
in their
pleasure
own
in their own
terms are
terms
as
are as
real
real
as
as
phenomenal
phenomenal
colors. I mean,
colors. I
so
mean, so
to the extent
to
that
the
I have
extent
a
that I have a
very high
very high
confidence that
confidence that
my experience
my
of blue
experience of blue
exists and that
exists
it's
and that
different
it's
than my
different than
experience
my
of red.
experience of red.
Likewise,
Likewise, I would say yes,
suffering
suffering
exists and it's
exists
bad,
and it's bad,
and pleasure
and
and
pleasure and
well-being
well-being
exists, and
exists,
it's good.
and it's good.
Again, with
Again,
the word
with the
good
word
and
good
the word
and the
bad
word bad
actually
actually
having their
having
very
their very
semantic
semantic
origin
origin
in the
in the
experiences.
experiences.
I'm not saying
I'm
like
not
hey,
saying
like
like hey,
good
like
has
good has
this
this
magical
magical
meaning that
meaning
somehow
that somehow
like
can be
associated with these
associated with
experiences.
these
Like no,
experiences.
no, no.
Like
The
no, the
experiences
experiences
themselves,
themselves. When you have
then
them,
you
then
can
you
have
can
the
have the
meaning of
meaning
what good
of
and
what
bad
good and
is.
bad is.
And
And
yeah, I mean, I
yeah, I
have
mean, I have
doubted
doubted
whether my
whether
experience
my
of
experience of
colors are
colors
real,
are real,
and
and
when
when
I can
I
close
can
my
close my
eyes and
eyes
forget
and
about
forget about
colors and
colors
start
and
being very
start being very
skeptical
skeptical
that
that actually
any colors
any
are real.
colors are real.
And likewise
And
with
likewise with
pleasure
pleasure and
suffering,
and
I've
suffering, I've
definitely been some
sometimes in my
lifetime
lifetime
that I
that I
felt
felt
good or
good or
neutral for
neutral
like a
for like a
fairly
fairly
large amount of
large
time,
amount of time,
where I
where I
started
started
doubting that
doubting that
actually there is
actually
such a
there is
thing as
such a thing as
suffering. That
suffering. That
like
like
it's
it's
weird that
weird
people
that
would
people would
complain about
complain about
existing and so
existing and so
on. There's
on.
always
There's
a bright
always a
side
bright
to
side to
everything, and
everything, and and it's just
and
false.
it's just false.
It's just like actually like the space of conceivable experiences that I had was just impoverished and restricted. So yes, so there's like states of consciousness where it's very sensible to doubt that actually there's anything relevant to pleasure and pain
and suffering
and well-being.
But I think that's
just a state of ignorance. It's just not being in touch with those
qualia
varieties.
Excellent. Well, I'm acutely aware that we've basically doubled the amount of time we spent doing the interview, and I realise that you might be it might be sort of prudent to sort of put a pause on this interview and maybe do more at a later time. But look, it's been great having you, and look, I really look forward to talking more in the future. But if there's any concluding remarks right now that you'd like to give to close the interview, what would they be?
Yeah. So my concluding remark would be to point out that actually
when you look
at the effect of different research on the future. The things that are in a sense about figuring out the fundamental principles and nature of things are the most likely to actually have the most proportionate effect. Just as pretty much the effect of different charities. We know it's a power law, like 80% of the benefits come from 20%, and it's even more skewed at the higher you go in the percentiles. Likewise, in terms of like what you're researching and actually what information you may be able to acquire. So understanding at a physical and computational level valence, phenomenal binding, qualia varieties, I think those really are in a sense like the keys to understand what the future will be by far. The answers to those questions predict better what the long-term future is than anything else that we may have. Which is why yes, I encourage anybody who's sort of like borderline contemplating whether to take this idea seriously to try to go for it. It may pay off for all of us.
Fantastic. Well, it's been fantastic having you, and look, I look forward to do it again soon. Everybody, this is Andres. You can check out his blog at qualiacomputing.com, and there's you've got you're on Facebook and you're on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
So look, I encourage you to get in touch with Andres and collaborate in any useful research direction that he's proposing today. I look forward to speaking with you again.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the interview. Wonderful host.
My pleasure.